Robert Greene's fourth law of power, always say less than necessary, addresses this specific vulnerability. It moves beyond the simple advice to be shy or stoic. This strategy functions through the creation of information asymmetry. By rationing your output, you force the other party to operate with incomplete data, shifting the balance of social leverage in your favor. Historical failures and psychological data demonstrate that withholding words systematically generates authority in the eyes of an observer. Yet, in the 2026 digital economy, applying this law as a blanket rule of silence leads to professional invisibility. Effective execution requires finding the specific intersection where silence protects your logic without causing you to disappear from the market entirely. The consequences of verbal excess are documented in the career of the Roman military hero Gnaeus Marcius, known as Coriolanus. Marcius originally held a position of high status, built on battlefield victories. To the Roman public, he was a silent, almost mythic icon defined by action. When he entered politics, he abandoned this persona. He began delivering long, arrogant justifications to the masses, attempting to explain his superiority in exhaustive detail. The public's perception shifted immediately. The more he talked, the more his aura of grandeur dissolved into the image of a common, irritable politician. This verbal transparency led to public condemnation and lifelong banishment. He lost his power because he provided his enemies with a clear map of his character flaws. This failure establishes the baseline for Law 4. A high volume of speech often makes a person appear common and less in control. Spoken words function as irreversible data points. They provide observers with the exact information needed to identify emotional instability and predict future behavior. Withholding that data maintains a protective barrier. It denies opponents the ammunition they need to mount a targeted attack. This chart reflects data from the Association for Psychological Science regarding the link between language and perceived authority. Researchers found that individuals who use abstract, sparse language are processed by observers as possessing higher status and control. Listeners subconsciously categorize verbose, detail-heavy speech as a sign of reactivity. It signals that the speaker is attempting to fill space or seek validation. This psychological effect was the primary tool of King Louis XIV, who maintained his position by being notoriously unreadable. His response to almost every request, "I shall see," was a masterclass in abstraction. It gave his courtiers zero data to analyze or use for planning. His silence forced subordinates into a state of chronic uncertainty. Without information, they remained in a defensive, suspended position. People often compulsively fill silence to ease their own anxiety. Louis used this to wait for his opponents to overspeak, eventually revealing their true intentions and weaknesses. This creates a dynamic where silence functions as a mechanism for intelligence gathering. It uses the other party's need for communication to expose their positioning. These dynamics are amplified in tightly knit social or corporate environments, such as the dense networks common in Indian society. In these environments, excess speech increases the risk of friction. Every unnecessary sentence is a new opportunity for a fatal misunderstanding or a conflict to escalate. Silence here serves as an emotional heat sink. It absorbs the energy of a conflict and prevents the speaker from becoming entangled in the immediate impulses of a dispute. Balthasar Gracian's 17th century text, The Art of Worldly Wisdom, identifies this discipline as a core requirement for leadership. Gratian describes the human tongue as a wild beast. He notes that very few possess the internal regulation required to master it once an interaction begins. Controlling one's output serves as proof of a leader's autonomy. It demonstrates that they are not a slave to their first impressions or common impulses. In high-pressure scenarios, the ability to withhold a response is the primary evidence of emotional discipline. However, applying a 17th century model of total silence to the modern world is a strategic error. Strategist Lucio Buffalmano notes that the context of power has changed. The modern attention economy has increased the cost of remaining quiet. In a hypermobile, democratized professional world, absolute silence often leads to irrelevance rather than mystery. Without a vocal presence, a professional appears easily sidelined or unsophisticated. If you don't speak, you allow others to define your reputation for you. Modern leaders use frequent communication to build status and frame the conversations in their industry. Visibility is now a prerequisite for authority. There is also an organizational risk. Absolute silence can arouse suspicion in superiors, who equate a lack of communication with a lack of progress or transparency. Adhering strictly to a policy of silence today can result in professional invisibility. Navigating this requires an approach located at the intersection of broad presence and tactical silence. We can call this strategic abstraction. The goal is not to stop speaking, but to control the resolution of the data you release. You must speak up broadly and frequently to establish authority and build a reputation in the market. This creates the visibility needed for modern leadership. But the moment the conversation turns to tactical details, inner intentions, or negotiations, you must immediately restrict the data stream. Words are a form of currency. Flooding an interaction with unnecessary detail causes a devaluation of your verbal output. When you provide too much information, the market price of each individual statement you make drops. By rationing tactical data, you force others to assign a higher premium to the information you finally choose to share. This maintains the information asymmetry. You continue to gather data on others while keeping your own internal logic secure and unmapped. Authority in 2026 relies on this balance, using broad visibility to build your status, while maintaining a precise tactical silence to protect your leverage.
Subscribe and stay ahead of the game.